Okay. Okay, so, well, look, it's a big topic about the industries in general, innovation, you know, that can be possible. You know, I'm going to try not to talk about the industry the way everybody talks about it. Like everybody goes, the industry is inefficient and, you know, everything is over budget and over time. We all know that. I mean, I'm not going to stand up here and say the things everybody knows. I did want to point out it's the only eye chart that I have, and it's one of the things that I learned when I was operating in the industry is what you have on this chart is all the biggest industries in the world. So retail is the biggest. You can see it's 23 trillion. And then at the very top is construction. So construction is 12 trillion if you include everything, 8 trillion if you just include, you know, building construction. So that leaves out highways and bridges and tunnels and so on. I mean, it doesn't really matter about that. Everybody knows it's a really big industry. What's interesting about the numbers is when you see in the second column, so Walmart, 500 billion, so 2.1% of the market, and right on down through, you know, who the biggest players are in the industry and what percentage of the industry they have. This is maybe not information that is as obvious to you. If you look at the top in the yellow, and you see the biggest companies in the world in construction are Chinese companies, which are primarily, you know, government. You take that out, you know, the biggest businesses, look at them, 0.2%. You know, here's, you know, Bouygues, 0.1%, maybe they're here. I mean, this is the only industry of size. And so there's all the industries, you can see them, you know, oil and gas, car and auto, all kind of stuff. The biggest players have some meaningful percentage of the business, and that is not true in construction. And the reason it's not true in construction is because you don't have economies of scale. And that's, when I think about industries and disruption, I think, how do you get economies of scale? If you have a GC who buys another GC, you have diseconomies of scale. I mean, right, because you're bigger, so you have more revenue, but you don't get scale advantage from that. You get diseconomies because it's harder to run a bigger business, and so on, you have bigger risk. And that's why this is the way the industry is. And what I'm going to talk about a little bit today in a short amount of time is ways to think about getting scale. And there are companies that are doing that are making various attempts, and I'll show you a little bit about it. So this is my summary, if you will, of some of the issues. And I have ideas about solutions here, so it's not particularly useful for me to stand up here and go, you know, this industry's all messed up. Goodbye, let's have a cocktail. So starting with design, I mean, all designs are unique. That in itself isn't very scalable. And now you have all these new tools happening, right? And everybody all day today is going to be talking about new tools, new ways of making things more efficient, stuff like that. But it starts at design, and I've talked to a bunch of architects who are here and lots of architects around the world talking about what architects actually do. And if designers don't take into account the way things can be built, you know, the new materials and so on, it's hard to ever get scale. If we're going to just stick with the thing where every design is unique, it's going to be hard to get scale. Only industry I know where the customers don't know their suppliers. I mean, it's fairly shocking. And you know, not to mention names, but working with one of the really big general contractors and one of the big, you know, cement suppliers is like their biggest supplier, and they have no relationship with them at all. None. Never talk to each other. Because it's all bought through subcontractors. Doesn't make any sense. Because if you're not in touch with your suppliers, how do you iterate to get that process changing? I should have put this third point last because it's the most important one, which is that who gets the money for how much effort they put in doesn't work right in this industry. And there are many industries. Flextronics, I'll show you a slide. You know, my company I built years back was fairly similar. But the point about this is that an enormous amount of hard work is done by the supply chain, if you will. So general contractors, subcontractors, architects and engineers, and none of them make very much money. I mean, it's a living. I mean, you know, it's not horrible. But the people who put up the capital and are the end customers, they're the ones who make all the money. And that has to change in some fashion. I'll talk about that a little bit. And then technology isn't used for insights. At the end, I'm going to show you a little bit of a video, not the whole thing, but just to give you an idea of what's possible with with one of my investments, Slate, who are also speaking later today. It's amazing talking to the general contractors, and for that matter, the subcontractors and others, but primarily at the general contractor level, how little is ever learned from a project. Everybody does a big project, and then they get together and go, what went wrong and what went right, and put all this stuff into data and these dark pools of data now that are never looked at again. So like, what's the point? And so we've created a tool that actually will allow that to happen. So Flextronics, the company I think many people know from my bio, was a business that I took over in 1993, 100 million of revenue, was 25 billion when I left. We got real scale there. We had scale advantages. This business looks very much like the general contractor business in the sense that we did all the hard work. I mean, when I left there, we had factories in 26 countries. We had 15,000 suppliers. We, we did design work. We did, the quality control. We did the logistics. I mean, we had this whole, managed the whole layer. And it was a 7% gross margin business, 3% operating profit. And that was after we had scale. And so I learned a lot from that business and some of the other investments that I've made. Quickly, these are all companies that I've invested in the past through my venture fund and my growth capital fund. Crocs, you may know, kind of ridiculous. This is a business that they just created a new market. I mean, everybody has shoes, and they came along and said, here's a different kind of a shoe, and did real scale. Interestingly enough, this company is now $3 billion in revenue. It's the largest shoe company in the world after the athletic guys, after Nike and Adidas. So pretty impressive. But became a real scale business and kind of easy to do because you can see they're injection molded and probably, I hope everybody's wearing Crocs. GoPro is another one I invested in early, and Crocs I invested in very, very early. Who would have thunk it would turn out to be the way it was? GoPro is really an interesting one. Also a new product creation. Like Flextronics didn't do anything new in this sense. So it's more like construction in that way. But these are companies that created a new version of products that had been around forever. GoPro was a buddy of mine who was a surfer, and he wanted to video himself, and he couldn't, so he created this product. And now it has something like 98% of the world's market for action cameras. Kind of an interesting one, fun one. Tesla, same, much more of a manufacturing approach, and I think this is my bio here that I ran the company for a bit. It's very early, before we had a product, was when I was there. But again, taking on an existing business, but creating a product that was different from what everybody else was doing, and met a need, and is now, everybody knows the story. I mean, it's a big deal. This one's an interesting one. It's one of my current investments, supersonic flight. It's, for those older people in the crowd, the Concorde was designed in the 60s. I mean, 60 years ago. And you didn't have carbon fiber. And so what these guys are doing is just recreating that event, but using all the new technologies. So much lighter materials, much more efficient engines, and they're going to do the same thing the Concorde did, but at a third the cost, or a quarter of the cost. So kind of an interesting one to watch. Plane hasn't flown yet, but they already have $15 billion of orders, so it's kind of a good start. Okay. Back to so those are ideas of how new industries have been built and stuff like that. Now let's talk about what I'm doing here. So one of the things that I did last month was I read a 300-page book on concrete called Concrete Planet. I sort of don't recommend it, although it's interesting. But in that book, they talk about architecture, and Vitruvio, who's up here, wrote the book called On Architecture 2,000 years ago. And in that book, among other things, he says that for architecture to be, for buildings to be good, they have to be beautiful, useful, and durable. It's 2,000 years ago, and I challenge you to look around and see how many buildings you think meet that criteria, right? Durable, of course, is a problem with concrete, because as you may or may not know, concrete is all going to fall apart now, because rebar is in concrete, and rebar eventually gets water, and then it grows, and it expands and breaks the concrete. Another story. But what's important here is that in the time that this book was written, architects did all the work. Architects specified the materials and ran the construction projects. So if you come back to what I said earlier about design, and one of the things that's broken in the industry, this is one of the issues, is that design is disconnected from materials and from construction methodologies. And it didn't used to be that way, and among other things, I would suggest we move back in that direction because I think that will be helpful. New materials. So these first two, Biomason and Hempitecture, are two of my firm's investments, and Prometheus is not, but just announced a fundraise. Biomason is making cement biologically, using bacteria to create the cement. Really, really cool company. Everybody knows concrete is a big, issue for carbon emissions and so on. Prometheus is using algae to do the same thing. Hempitecture, the middle one, is a company doing plant-based insulation. So it can be, hemp, it can be grasses, it can be cotton. There's different approaches, but very green, have very, really good characteristics and so on. The reason I put this slide in here was not as an advertisement for my investments, but because one of the things I learned in my days at Katerra is getting new kinds of materials into designs is almost impossible. And it's almost impossible because who's going to do it? The architects won't specify it because that's not what the customers are looking for. The subcontractors aren't going to take the risk. The general contractors aren't going to. So there's nobody to take the risk. And so you have these really good products, and it's very hard to get them into companies. When I was at Katerra, I talked to one of the suppliers of drywall, and they had come up with a new kind of drywall, that was fire resistant. A wonderful thing. And they couldn't get anybody to use it because there wasn't anybody who was going to take a risk on some new product that wasn't out there. Going back to the architectural design, this is a place that there's some draw from customers, to be fair. Their customers will say, oh, if I can get, a carbon-free cement, I want that. But typically new materials are riskier and oftentimes they're more expensive. And then who's going to write the extra check, right? So very difficult. But there are cool new materials being developed. Okay, now I'm going to show you a few slides. There's one of the really good things that happened from Katerra is that a whole bunch of new companies got started. And I'm going to show you slides on a bunch of them. They're not, many of these slides aren't ones that I personally know. I met a couple more at the show, here yesterday, talked to some people doing this stuff. What I call buildings as a product. And there's a lot of new approaches to doing this. And that's an opportunity to create scale. So one of the issues with construction, as everybody knows, I'm preaching to the choir, it's a very complex industry. And I can't overgeneralize. I don't want to overgeneralize. But I'll say that if you can create a product that you can repeat over and over, you can build scale there. Because the more you do it, the more efficient you get at it, the better you buy materials because you have more, you have more demand, you get better prices. And so you begin to create a flywheel where you can actually take cost out and benefit from it. This is one of my investments, Onyx Homes, building single-family homes, which is pretty repeatable. In this case, the company is a vertically integrated developer, so does the design, does the manufacturing, does the construction, sells the product, and therefore captures the whole value chain, if you will, doing unbelievably well. All done with factory components, pretty simple construction. Here's a bathroom pod. We put it in an hour and a half, comes from a factory that way. Kitchen comes from the factory, gets installed in 40 minutes. So we're beginning to get good at this kind of stuff. Next is a company I know of. I've talked to the CEO. I haven't been to their factory, but another company that is basically starting from components, so they make the walls. But they also have the design. And they're doing Starbucks all over the place. And so they have a design, they supply the components. Different GCs build them, but it's more integrated, at least in terms of the design is tied to the materials, sort of a theme, that you've heard from me, doing very well. Modulus, another company that I think maybe somebody here, proprietary kit of parts. This is designed for multifamily, but it specified all the materials and the suppliers of those materials. So again, you can begin to get scale by doing the same thing, again and again. Mighty Buildings, 3D printing, delivers full buildings, and each of these is a company that is trying to attack those inefficiencies, generally in a fairly small way, but a very good start. Last one I think I have here is Blocks, which is a U.S. company that is making clinics. That's the picture on the right, is doing clinics for Walmart. Same thing all the time, build it in a factory, it's the same product. So, you get the theme here. These are all new companies, and there's many, many more. I met 2 yesterday, right? Which is a really good thing. because what these companies are doing is trying to integrate design materials, construction methodologies, and repeatability, and all of those are ways to begin to get scale, into the business. And the more of this, the better. So one of the things that I didn't talk about earlier, but I did want to mention is that, I can do it at the end. Technology we talked about. I'm going to show you a little bit of a video, as I said. There's lots of investment going into software companies. Again, a bunch of them are here, and I applaud everybody's activities. There is very little, cross-pollination or getting these things to work together. So many of them are, point solutions. You use Procore for construction management. You use, P6 for budgeting, and the idea is to get these things to work together. The thing that has surprised me the most about software solutions, not only in this industry, but in all industries, is how little our software talks to us. I mean, this is, 2021. Why don't our spreadsheets say, here's where I would look? You have millions of rows and columns and stuff like that. We have all the ability to say, these are the anomalies and you should look at it. And that's the case in technology, and we have this company, Slate, which hopefully is doing some of that, which is to take all this historical information and current information and predicting future trends and saying, here are the things you should be thinking about and working at. So just a little touch. I'm not showing you the whole thing. Just to give you an idea of what this is.
Slate helps your day get started on the right foot. As you're on your way to the job site, you can have a conversation with Slate's digital assistant to cover the top 5 items for your day and any Slate insights that the digital assistant has discovered. Today's top 5 is not only about today, but also about yesterday, as well as next week. The before, during, and after are at the core of Slate. The digital assistant sequentially moves through the top 5, giving you the opportunity to engage and act. The digital assistant will also touch upon Slate insights, such as opportunities to increase equipment utilization, as well as improve decarbonization. As with tasks, you can act on Slate insights by telling Slate what to do next.
Slate, send notification to excavator operators to reduce idle time.
Shall I send?
Yes.
If other thoughts are triggered, just tell Slate what to do next. Slate keeps you up to date.
Project site entered.
And Slate learns from the morning briefing, identifying how the information can be leveraged as the day progresses. It's the start of a new week. Let's check the production metrics for the last period to the previous period. The Slate Production Center brings together data from Slate as well as from external data sources. The data widgets display values for the collection of production metrics. The current scheduled performance index is 1.27, which is more than 30% better than the previous period. Slate helps you keep an eye on the metrics that matter for your incremental or real-time data updates. The line chart extends the view of the scheduled performance index across multiple periods to evaluate trends. The Slate Production Center is not a static dashboard, but an actionable data portal. The Slate's Insight Collection includes firm knowledge such as lessons learned and best practices, as well as insights generated by the teams and digital assistant for current and past projects. The expanded map view displays the project supply chain. See what deliveries are occurring today. Evaluate the route they're going to be taking. With location intelligence, visually check the status of checklists across the zones of the project.
Okay, it goes on. That just gives you a taste of the kinds of things we're doing there, and the Slate people are here. Joel's speaking this afternoon if you want to learn more about that. But the point of that is to give you an idea that in today's world with artificial intelligence and data lakes and all the other things that people are talking about, there actually is a way, it's not easy, but there is a way to create real information, usable information from all the stuff that you're doing and that you used to do and how to predict forward. Here are the things to watch out for and so on. So. This is back to the earlier slide and my last slide, and I'll take a few questions. But as I said, I don't think it's helpful to just lay out problems and not some solutions. I personally believe, for right or wrong, that the company needs, that this industry needs a lot more vertical integration. And that comes in a lot of different forms. It means a lot of different things to different people. But but for architects going back to the first one, and actually the materials side as well, is that design needs to be much more integrated in what's happening downstream. And there's different ways of doing that, but I think that's actually really important. If I were the general contractor, I would insist that all of my subcontractors give me every piece of data that they have. How much labor they spent on a job, what materials they used, what worked, what didn't work, because we don't have that sharing in this industry. Slate, the software, will do that for you. I mean, that's one way of tying all the data together. But it makes no sense that the end user isn't directly in contact with the suppliers, which both will allow for more efficiency to be created and will also allow for more scale, because then the contractors can pick the subcontractors that are doing the best job for them and do more with them. I also think that vertically integrating between general contractors and subcontractors and architects and engineers is a useful thing to think about doing. I think that creates more scale and more efficiencies. This third point is the most important one. One of the things that I learned at Katerra is we were doing all the hard work, and like in Flextronics, we were doing all the hard work, and we didn't make all the money. We made small amounts incrementally. But the problem you have in this industry is all you people in the room, many of you people in the room and people who are watching, are looking at new tools to make their businesses more efficient. But if you don't get to keep any of the money, why would you keep doing it? And here's what I mean. Let me use a simple example. If architects automate the design, which is all kinds of things being done for architects to automate design, and they can now create a product design at half the price, why would they invest all that? Why would you invest all that money if you don't get to keep any of that? If all you get to do is sell your service now for half as much. And the industry is rife with this. A lot of new tools, people wanting to use new tools, wanting to become more efficient, all that kind of stuff. But if you don't get to save any of that, if you don't get to pocket any of that, why would you do it? And my solution here is to negotiate to the extent possible. It's hard. I'm not saying it's easy. But to set benchmarks of here's what it costs, here's the budget. Every dollar we save, we get to keep some amount, whoever we is, the general contractor, subcontractors, architects, engineers. Then everybody wins. Now there's an incentive system where it actually makes sense to try to drive cost out. Whereas in the way the world works today, there isn't an incentive to drive cost out. Oh, I mean, at some level, you get to win more business if you're the cheapest guy. But in the end, you have to be able to get some of the value back that you put in. Otherwise, it's just a fool's errand. And I'll stop there. We talked about the technology, and happy to take questions.
Yeah, it's even worse than that, because a lot of architects do work for free up until very almost detailed design level before they hopefully get it. So the industry's in trouble.
Even worse.
The industry's in trouble from both ends.
Yes.
So who's got questions for Michael? Okay. Oh, towel.
Thank you very much. Firstly, very, very interesting lecture. Yeah, just relating to your last comment about different business models and perhaps even different software models. We're talking about open source, the ability to enjoy, let's say, a delta on the saving or on the extra cost. So I'm wondering, with regard to Katerra, when you look, let's say, to the Katerra of the future with everything learned, would you now do that more software-based and shared revenue-based, or do you still think owning the supply chain is the way to create kind of, let's say, the new Katerra? Yeah.
Well, so nobody's really written the story about Katerra in terms of what really happened. What really happened is everything I said today is what I was trying to do at Katerra, is to make Katerra a developer. So the articles were all written say we tried to do too much, and the fact is we tried to do too little, because we were doing all the hard work, and the money was always going to the developer. The problem we had at Katerra was that some of the biggest investors were developers, and they didn't want the company to go in a direction that would compete with them. But in answer to your question, my solution there was to capture the entire value chain ourselves. I mean, we did we had architects and engineers, we had factories, and all that stuff was all working fine. The problem is we were doing what I just talked about at the end. We were spending all the money to lower the cost, and the benefit was not getting to Katerra, it was getting to the developer. And my conclusion was to go be the developer, and then we started Onyx as one of the follow-on companies, and it's a developer. And that way you have the whole chain. There's nobody to say, I want a little bit of this and that, or I don't want these new materials. We were able to do all of that. And that's what I think is the direction the industry has to go in, is capturing more of the value to the supply chain, however you define that.
In industry terms, it was almost kind of become Boeing. Boeing owns all the supply chain, and it owns the design, and they are the answerable ones.
Look, the car industry is that way. You know, Crocs, GoPro, you know, iFly, these kinds of companies, they're designing the products, and they're designing it to the materials they want to use in the manufacturing process and all the other stuff, and then, of course, they get to make a lot more money.
Any other questions? Have I got my hands? I'm standing in the wrong place to be asking that question. I'll just go to the front again. So the thing that kind of freaked me out when I came to see you in Las Vegas was I was talking to Richard Harpham, and so you were flat packing buildings, shipping them out of state, but all the walls had the electronics, the plumbing already built in, sealed. Yep. They'd go from, so you were in Arizona, right? It would go to Utah, and then they'd start assembling the building, and then the building inspector would come along and then insist on ripping off the walls to have a look at the plumbing to see that if it was conforming to the local standards, which seemed like crazy, but that happened in every state.
That's generally not true. It's generally not true. At the factory level, you get that stuff sorted out at the factory level. I can tell you, like on the bathroom pods for the Onyx homes that I showed, those bathroom pods are approved in the state of Florida. They came to the factory and they said, when you install it, we're going to want to see this. So we changed the design so that they could see the connections. And now anywhere in Florida, they can put that bathroom pod in, and it is approved in the state. So there's some work you have to do to get that done, but you can definitely do that.
Do you have to do that 50 times? Or how many states? 51? 50?
Well, probably. The reality is the more you do it, the easier it gets, because other people will. So it was not that expensive a process on that.
So is Onyx more geo-focused than Katerra was?
It is today, yeah.
So California or?
There's Florida and Texas.
Florida, okay.
Florida and Texas.
And the plan is, see where it goes.
Coming near to a neighborhood near you. Yeah, I don't know. We'll see.
Any other companies, people out there want to ask questions about Katerra? Yeah, wait. Not that I know that he wants us to talk about it, but sorry.
Hi there, Robert Klashko. I'm actually a measured building surveyor, so I don't think I feature in this future. My question was really about whether are you looking at this in terms of building homes or all buildings, in that?
Well, my suggestion is as many buildings as possible. In my own companies, we're not doing all buildings. It's too many. But that's why I show these different pictures. You can look at what Modula's doing, or Nexi's doing, Starbucks, and Blocks is doing clinics. All those are buildings as a product. Onyx is doing single-family homes. We could, there's a lot of construction. We're going to stick with single-family. But there are other companies and other companies here that are looking at other products. And the idea is to integrate the process, whatever section of the industry you pick, and try to get really efficient at that.
I'm thinking about it more in the context that I see buildings procured now, in that if you could say 90% of all buildings is the same across all of those buildings, but we don't treat the design of buildings like that.
Right.
And in many instances, it's partly there's a financial benefit in mollycoddling the client into the idea that they are unique, and
right.
Because you get more fee from that. I mean, I've made that argument. I used to be a designer, sort of gave up because I didn't want it badly enough. But that whole in my lifetime, I've gone through a period of in the UK where standardization was supposed to happen, but then all of the projects and all the contractors kind of messed about with the standards a little bit.
Sure.
It looked, 20 years ago to be a very positive environment for a small practitioner like me, because, I can do standards, but...
So look, my overriding theme of this in terms of changing the industry is to think about scale. Scale is doing the same things again and again with little tweaks, whatever. I mean, electronics, we made all different kinds of electronics, but every product was the same components assembled in the same way, all that kind of stuff. You want to try to get scale. There's a bunch of different ways to get scale. I talked about some of them today, but I think everybody should be thinking about their business in terms of scale. Yes, sir. I can hear you.
Mike doesn't need a mic.
For something completely different, there's been a lot of expenditure, for lack of a better word, in software. Large software companies, what can they do to help make building more efficient? Autodesk, for example, has spent $2 billion on improving, quote unquote, their software. Right. But does that make it more efficient? Well, I mean, your point's a good one.
Yeah, look, I mean, going back to the title of my talk and some of the companies I showed around innovation, massive innovation almost never comes from the existing companies, which is why GoPro was a different company, Crocs was a different company, and Tesla was a different company. I mean, so is Autodesk going to do it? There is the book you guys all know, Innovator's Dilemma. I mean, the true advancements rarely come from the existing incumbents in the industry. They come from new guys, like Slate, like what HOK is doing, all these new things. Because they have an incentive, because if they do better, they actually knock off the other guy, whereas the other guy isn't trying to knock themselves off. This is kind of cocktail conversation, but I always wonder, like you take Slate, we just showed you something. This is slick software that does really incredible stuff. You know, that's 50 people and $5 million. I mean, that's the cost of pencils at Autodesk. So I don't understand why software companies don't start groups, send them off and say, try to destroy us. They don't. But I would if I were doing that. Yes, sir.
I've got another question, because you put up the two very nice, like beautiful, sustainable, and the third one, the third is?
Oh, durable.
So beautiful, sustainable, and...
No, beautiful, useful, and durable.
Durable, yeah. So the modular companies I've seen, it's sort of durable. It's built of wood, so you showed a picture of buildings that were around for a couple of thousand years, or 1,000 years. Yeah. And I wonder if these houses will be around for 1,000 years. So how do you think this is going to work out, and also beautiful if everything looks the same because it's modular? Do you think there's beauty to that? Where do you think the industry is going in that respect? Because this is, I think, why architects, they always want to have their own unique design, because they want to create something beautiful that's not repeated over and over again, which I think is one of the pitfalls why it's the industry is the way it is. So what do you think about that?
It's a big, complicated question. I wish I could answer it in a soundbite. But I'll say, a couple of things. First of all, the reason that things are not many things, let's not overgeneralize. Why they're not beautiful and they're not durable is because it costs more money to do that. And in so many segments of the industry, the end user, the end buyer, isn't willing to pay extra, right? And so, to make things more beautiful, you put trim on it, you put different kinds of materials, you make things look really nice and all that kind of stuff. That costs more money. The multifamily players, which is where I primarily operated when I was at Katerra, have no interest, zero interest in spending any money to make things more durable, because all they do is fill them and sell them. So they don't get any benefit from making them more beautiful and more durable. That is not true of everybody in the industry, and it is also not true that architects cannot develop uniquely beautiful looking things and still use the same basic tools, the same basic materials, and design to manufacturing techniques. That it is possible, so let's not give up on that.
Michael, hi. I'm over here.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. A lot of what you've done before and what you're talking about now about integrating processes and controlling the supply chain is very much a reflection on the manufacturing sector. Are you basically saying that the way the construction industry is run right at the moment is just doomed to failure?
Well, by definition. I mean, look, what's everybody doing here? Next build, right? Can't we find a better way to do this? Here's one of the things that I say. We're all people. We operate in our own best interest, right? So I was just talking about, answering the last question about, developers who develop things as cheaply as they can. It's in their best interest to do so. They make more money doing that. Architects, engineers, subcontractors, and general contractors are all cost plus, right? And so at cost plus, what's the incentive to lower the cost? There isn't any. And that's just a fact. Does the industry work? Sure it works. Everybody talks about how inefficient crappy it is, but everybody's making a living. it is in your best interest, if it's cost plus, to have the cost go up. And I'm suggesting you have to break that if you want to do better. But that's not to say it doesn't work. It works. I mean, it's a $12 trillion business, and everybody's making money in it. It's just not a great industry.
I'm just going to wrap it up with my own question.
Please.
I'm an idiot. There are millions of Beetles out there, and everyone still thinks a Beetle's a cute car. Does the industry need a Beetle residential building? It needs something that people want that can be repeated time and time again, and people will like it. But no one's really come up with the Beetle equivalent of a residential home.
Yeah, I don't agree with you. I think there's actually a lot of that happening. I mean, Onyx is one. There's, you know, the architecture group here, Automated Architecture, doing that. There's actually quite a lot. If I could end with this thought, I'll do it this way. There are no new ideas in the world. I mean, in 1934, you could get a home from Sears Roebuck in the United States. It came on a rail car. All the components, that scalable business, right? They had a scalable business, made them over and over and over, and you got them. It came with a page that told you how to put the damn thing together. You have Clayton Homes, Berkshire Hathaway. I mean, they just make the same home over and over and over again. They make them factories. They have like 80 factories in the United States. We aren't talking about something nobody's ever thought of. We're just saying that it's not been done in enough places, and all those pictures of companies that I've showed are doing this. They're creating products, different ones. Single-family homes, Starbucks, you know, clinics. This is the beginning of the industry changing to where products are repeatable, but they're still good products, and that can be done. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.